Hi, I'm Megan and I'm here with Kerrie, and this is the second of our series of videos. This one is about couple communication and how couples can thrive during times of stress and learn new ways of talking together and having conversations together. And I'm sure Kerrie's going to give us some great tips on that. So, Kerrie, welcome. What is communication?
So communication for couples is a bit more complex than what we might initially think of it as, because it's not just the words that we want to use to say something. It involves a lot of non-verbal communication. It involves our body language, our tone of voice, our general behaviour. For instance, one example might be if, let's say there's a couple and they have a baby and the man stays out at night and he doesn't come home. He's not verbally saying anything, but he's saying something in his not coming home that's sending a very strong message to his partner. And his partner might interpret it in many different ways, and he might be sending one of a variety of different messages. He might be saying that you're not important to me. He might be saying my job's more important than our baby. He might be saying you don't pay me enough attention. He might be saying I'm sad and worried and you haven't noticed. So communication can be very ambiguous, especially as it involves our total behaviour towards somebody else.
Can improving communication help reduce arguments and fights for couples?
Absolutely. So one thing that happens in a fight, there's usually an issue or a problem or something a couple disagree about. And then they try to talk about it, and they talk in a way that's offensive, upsetting, disturbing to the other person. They might be triggered and so they escalate. So actually their communication or their conversation goes haywire, and they don't really resolve the issue that they might be in disagreement about. So we have issues and problems on the one hand, and then we have how people talk about it on the other. And how they talk about it can be improved. You may not be able to absolutely resolve an issue, particularly with one conversation, but you can talk in a way where you really progress the issue and you whittle it down to its little components without hurting each other's feelings. And that's the aim of improving communication, to reduce the fights and arguments.
So what causes problems in communication?
One of the main causes of problems in communication is that people sometimes feel too vulnerable to actually say how they're really honestly feeling. And so instead of saying something like, for instance, I felt hurt this morning when you didn't say goodbye to me when you left for work, they might come home and then they might sulk, or they might withdraw. Or they may criticise their partner for something else they might have done, but they don't say what is underneath that attack, what is underneath that criticism. They don't reveal the hurt that is there. And then of course you can see how that would escalate. The partner could not understand why they're behaving in such a strange way. The partner could be attacking back or criticising back because they feel unfairly judged or attacked at that time. And they've no idea that the initial kind of, if you like, a pee under the mattress was this hurt feeling that happened in the morning. So in that way, arguments and fights can develop because it's an unsafe environment for somebody to be able to say, I felt really hurt. So sharing vulnerability and being able to expose yourself to your partner can be risky. And of course, sometimes partners don't act in ways that you want them to act, and in fact might confirm your very fear. And so if there's a history of that kind of interaction in a relationship, then people will be scared to say what they think and feel. They don't have a safe space to do it in.
So what is the best preparation for having an effective conversation?
The first thing to think about is, am I willing to listen? Am I willing to hear what my partner has to say? That's a pretty important thing, because if you're going to have an open conversation, you have to be prepared to some degree, walk in the shoes of your partner, to really listen to where they're coming from. And you've got to have a willingness to at least try to do that. Then I think you've got to be able to think about how are you going to let your partner know that you have really understood what they've said. And we call that active listening. So we're not just listening and listening thinking about what we're going to say next. We're listening thinking about how can I remember and get what my partner's saying so that I can say it back to them in a clear way. So the next part would be what we call self-soothing. Am I prepared to manage how I might feel when my partner says something to me that's going to disturb me or upset me? So usually we're having a conversation about something that's difficult anyway, or something that we can't agree on. So of course I have to be prepared that I'm not going to agree with my partner, I'm not going to see it how my partner sees it, but I have to therefore manage myself so that I can still listen, even though in a sense I'm being triggered by something. Then the next thing would be, am I willing to open up about my own feelings, my own thoughts, how I see it? Am I willing to really disclose what's going on for me in an honest way in this conversation? Even if you feel vulnerable, and that's the hardest thing. So in some ways, having the conversation could make it a little bit safer, but there's going to be risks, because you're going to be listening to things that upset you. You're going to not be able to express that straight away because you're listening, you're trying to tune in. And you have to be willing to say disclose those upset feelings, to say how you feel and tell your partner what's going on for you. The next thing would be to really honestly ask yourself, am I willing to make some changes in my behaviour? Am I willing to make some changes and be open to seeing things differently? Am I willing to do some things differently? Am I willing to compromise? Am I willing to soften? Am I willing to be flexible? They're hard questions, and I think the more prepared you are to make changes, the better the outcome will be of the conversation. Then the last thing would be, how are you going to conduct yourself? So how am I going to manage myself in this conversation? It's really important that a person doesn't escalate when they're trying to have a conversation about something that's disturbing. So the danger is that you get angry, that you start to become critical, that you attack, or that you get really defensive. So there's a kind of trick to explaining how you feel about something, while at the same time staying open to the other person. So being defensive is in a way batting back what someone said to you. But it is possible to explain the reason for something or why you've done something without actually batting back the other person's complaint and rejecting their point of view. And that's the art of having an effective conversation.
Is there an easy process that we could help couples learn, at least a little a structure that they could hold to when they're trying to really resolve something?
Well, I think the important part of what you just asked me is having the structure, because the structure actually provides the safety. So what we mean by structure is having, if you like, rules of engagement. It's like, how do we have this conversation? So first off, you have to be in a safe place. You have to be in an environment where you're not going to have interruptions, and you have to dedicate a certain amount of time. You can always extend, but probably you need to have a minimum of 20 minutes to half an hour to have the conversation. And then the principle is really turn taking. It's one person speaks while the other person listens, and then they switch. But there's a particular way of listening that's really important, and also a particular way of speaking. So let's say that step one is the first person is the speaker, and they talk about a concern that they have, an issue or a problem. And let's say they talk for about 5 minutes or even less, because remember, your partner has to try and remember what you've said. So little paragraphs are a good idea. And so they go first and they speak about a problem or an issue. Now, if you're the second person, you're listening. And so you have to listen very intently to what they're saying and try to understand the meaning of the words and also the feelings that might be behind the words. So with listening that intently, what you're doing is being prepared to say it back to them what you think that you have heard. If you're listening to the other person, you're really attending to what they're saying. When they stop, you say, it's a really good idea to just use the phrase, okay, what I hear you saying is, so gets you into just repeating back what you've heard them say, what you got from what they're saying, how you understand it. And if possible, say something like, you must be feeling frustrated or helpless or angry. And then the other person gets to say yes or no. If you've got it right, they'll say yes, and they can expand a bit more. If you haven't got it right, they're able to say, no, not exactly. It wasn't quite like that. Or I did say this and I don't think you heard that. Now, although this seems a bit laborious, it's actually very valuable, because the person who's speaking feels like you are attending to them so profoundly that they often say afterwards they have never felt so well listened to before. And it really is a very meaningful experience, as the listener will find out when it becomes their turn. So the first person goes first and gets to express the full issue, maybe in about paragraph chunks. And then as a couple you switch roles, and so the person who was previously talking about their problem or issue, they now become the listener. And it's the second person's turn to speak. The second person has a more difficult challenge, because they've had to listen and respond to the first person without saying what they were thinking or feeling at the time. But now is their turn, and so they get to respond. And usually they want to respond to the same issue. They want to say what they think about it or how they feel about it. And the first person, now it's their job to listen. It's their turn to really tune into what the other person's saying and say it back to them in the same way. What I hear you saying is, you must be feeling, and some feeling words like sad or upset or worried. And so the couple continue to have a conversation in this way, taking turns to listen and taking turns to speak. And that's why those preparation steps that I went through before are really important, so that both people are ready to follow this kind of structure in having their conversation. You add in the listening step, which reduces each person's frustration. Because I think when you're feeling listened to, you don't go on and on. You don't repeat what you're saying. You don't raise your voice, because you're being listened to. And that's why that listening step is so important. And when we talk to couples and we say, what is the worst thing about your communication? That everyone says, I don't feel listened to. And whether you agree or not, in a way, is beside the point. The issue is, are you feeling listened to, and are you able to listen to your partner, to really listen and figure out where they're coming from? I think in even making that effort comes across to the partner in a way that feels really valuable. At least the partner can say, at least I feel like you try to understand where I'm coming from, and I really appreciate that.
So Kerrie, do you have any final words of wisdom or tips for couples who want to communicate better?
Probably the most important thing about having an effective conversation, and the most important reason to do it is that it can bring you closer. It can reduce arguments and escalations, and it can make you feel better about your relationship and feel like you're progressing and you're working things out together. And I think the most important element of having an effective conversation is actually listening. And I think when people take the time to listen, not only listen but show that they're listening by actually saying in words the other person's point of view, it can have a very profound impact and a positive impact on relationships. So that would be my main tip for couples for improving their relationships.
Mm-hmm.